Yesterday, I saw this tweet from Corey DeAngelis describing how 26 states have opted into Trump's new school choice program. Here's a quick map of the states if you were interested. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is because while school choice is great and we should be advocating for that, it's much better if we can actually secure educational choice, particularly in the form of something like a K through 12 education savings account, or more commonly termed ESA. The reason an ESA is much better is because it makes it so that I not only am able to choose between schools, but also between educational providers at large. So instead of choosing between a public school, a private school, and a charter school, I could choose between sending my kid to a private school for half a day and then taking some of the leftover ESA funding and using it to pay for private tutors or a little bit of homeschooling. It just gives parents much more flexibility and students much more flexibility. So if a private school for a full day every day doesn't work well for a student, well, they could take that ESA funding, pay for half a school day or doing, school 3 days a week, and then take the rest of that funding, use it for homeschooling, private tutoring, online education providers, whatever, as long as it's used for the purpose of education. And you can place restrictions on that, more or less, depending on state, how much compliance, how much you're willing to risk some amount of misuse. You can vary that by state to state, and reasonable people can disagree over what those funds should cover, should not cover. But the point is, having the competition be between educational providers at large and not just schools is much, much better. Another thing I was looking at yesterday on the topic of education was what are sort of the regulations around teachers in private schools, in particular in the state of Michigan. Okay, and Michigan's just the state that I live in, so that's the one I started looking at. And there was something that frankly was a bit distressing to me. So I'm just going to read what it says. So for staff qualifications must be described. An individual may qualify to teach in Michigan non-public schools in one of three ways: by obtaining a Michigan teaching certificate, by obtaining a substitute full year or emergency teaching permit, by obtaining a bachelor's degree. However, if a non-public school claims an objection to teacher certification based on a sincerely held religious belief, the minimum education requirements for teachers are waived. Here's what bothers me about this. It basically makes it so that someone can't teach in a non-public Michigan school unless they have a bachelor's degree. Okay, because to get a Michigan teaching certificate, you essentially have to have a bachelor's degree. So if you had someone who is like a really, really good teacher, or you expect could be a really, really good teacher, but doesn't have any teaching experience yet because they don't have a bachelor's degree, you wouldn't be able to allow them to teach your kid, which makes zero sense because in the state of Michigan, you can homeschool your kid even if you don't have a bachelor's degree. Even if you don't even have a high school diploma, you can still homeschool your kid legally, which makes zero sense. If you can homeschool your kid legally without ever graduating high school, then why should it be illegal for a micro school to have a teacher who lacks a bachelor's degree? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so, again, I will reiterate, I'm glad that 26 states have opted in to Trump's new school choice program. But let's not pretend like that's the gold standard or like that's enough. It's great. I'm happy for it, but we really got to get to the point where we have K through 12 ESAs. This is if government is going to be involved in education, by the way. If government is going to fund education, the best way would be through something like a K through 12 ESA. Okay, so that's what we should be looking for. And even that really isn't enough because we also have to get rid of some of these regulations that don't make any sense. And I know some of you will probably be thinking, well, do you really want someone with less than a bachelor's degree teaching your kid? Well, keep in mind, you could have someone who has like a perfect SAT score, but just doesn't have a bachelor's degree. And I would probably be much more comfortable with that person teaching my kid, all else being equal, than someone who does have a bachelor's degree, but has like a 1200 or an 1150 on the SAT. So it's insane to me that that the state of Michigan, not we, the state of Michigan is going to say, yeah, you can homeschool your kid if you never graduated high school, but if that homeschooling mother who then is struggling wants to send their kid to be taught by someone who lacks a bachelor's degree but has a perfect SAT score or near perfect or something like that, that is illegal. That is against the law. It's literally banned. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But anyways, that was just something that annoyed me a bit that I thought was interesting and worth mentioning. But overall, it's great that, more school choice is getting passed, but we really do need to be pushing for K through 12 ESAs and also removing some, what I think are pretty obviously unnecessary restrictions on private schools as well. If you enjoyed this video, consider supporting my channel by shopping my merch or supporting me directly through my website, which should be linked in the description. You can also follow me on social media and subscribe on podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts to stay updated with new content.